Really, what we're tackling today is we're talking about story in video games and how the pursuit of being cinematic either enhances or distracts from that experience. So, the difference between Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect 2.
Right. So it's the apparent disregard of the game elements that we've grown up with.
But also, it's got stuff like really nice cutscenes that are, not necessarily pre-rendered, but really done well. Great voice acting. They get some A-list celebrities, B-list celebrities in there as the voice actors. So it's that sort of movement. And how does that affect story? And so, Hawf, I want you to give me your opinion first. Do you think those two things are mutually exclusive?
Well, I don't think they're necessarily mutually exclusive, but what I find is that the apparent magnetism of the idea of cinema for the gaming industry right now is pulling them away from the biggest component that we have in this medium, which is the interactivity. They're completely ripping out that interactivity and they're giving us a movie. I think it's cheapening the medium.
Okay, well, give me your biggest offender.
Ooh, biggest offender.
Biggest
offender would probably be the Metal Gear Solid franchise.
Okay, so you think Metal Gear Solid, it's pretty maybe linear, it's pretty mindless, and the whole thing is that it's
it's not mindless. It has it's very difficult, and it's probably got one of the most convoluted plots in the world. Okay, minus maybe Kingdom Hearts.
Okay, but what is what you don't like about it? Where's your gripe?
For every single game, it has 6 hours of cutscenes. It's literally just a ton of movies with gameplay in between. It's got these massive amounts of exposition and these huge, ridiculous monologues from characters that go on endlessly.
And of course, the opposite end of the spectrum would be something like, I don't know, Dungeon Crawl, where there's barely even graphics. Graphics were added as an afterthought.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I don't even know if you can necessarily compare Dungeon Crawl in this sort of facility, because Dungeon Crawl basically doesn't have a storyline. We still want to find something with a storyline to compare this to. I would say on the opposite end of the spectrum, there's okay. Not even...
Well, I was going to save this one, but here's a good example of a very cinematic game that is also really good at gameplay and stuff, Bastion. And I watched you play through that game. I didn't even play it, and I enjoyed just watching you play through it, and it didn't have really very many cutscenes at all.
And that game is super linear, but it never pulls control away from the player. And that's my biggest gripe about lots of games today. They're huge on massive set pieces and just giant cinematic moments, and they drag control away from the player. Whereas in Bastion,
you don't want to ever stop controlling your character.
As soon as you lose control of the character, that takes you out of the universe dramatically.
Okay, so is there a way to have a good story in a game that isn't audio overlays? I assume that you'd think that BioShock had a good thing going where it had audio journals going on, and you could still shoot things while you got the background of the world and stuff. But
yeah, I think,
is there a way to do that doesn't involve audio just playing over while you're playing?
Even in a lot of first-person shooters, especially the Half-Life franchise, when you're just walking around and you're just walked into a room and you just still have control of your character and people are talking directly to you. That is worlds better than having your camera swing around and look at a dramatic handshake.
Really? You think that being able to just look around a room is better than having fixed camera angles that are cinematic?
Yes.
I mean, so say you're having a conversation in Dragon Age. You want to be up and above your characters like you normally are as you run around, and you just running around environments, and you choose dialogue options as you go.
See, that's a bit of a different experience, because I don't necessarily feel like that's taking control away from someone
because you get to choose the dialogue options.
Yeah, you get to choose the dialogue options, and that's huge. Although I do find it annoying when you just walk up and you like take a stupid stance or like just kind of like stand awkwardly and make weird motions that don't make any sense.
Okay, so your gripe is games that take any sort of control away from you for any amount of time, right?
Yeah, I mean, if they really want to approach the fact that this is a game, they need to stop treating games like movies.
Okay, so what about something like a little tiny cutscene where it just kind of introduces a little area? Like, let's say Ninja Gaiden, you're running through all these ninjas, and then you get to the big boss, and he swings around his nunchucks for a second, and you've got like a 15-20 second little cutscene where it's like, oh, and then there's a boss.
I mean, that's fine, but I also actually like it better when you're just like in the middle of it and you really just see that and feel that from your characters or the traditional perspective with which you see your character. I'd like to use World of Warcraft as an example, but they really cheapened the idea of boss battles in a lot of ways. But there were various boss battles where you'd walk into a room and there'd be a bunch of people doing a ritual, and then you would just be in that and you would go and you would stop it. And like that was way more interesting to me than zooming in on a boss and it being like, oh yeah, I'm a big scary boss, let me swing my arms around and freak out for a while, and then we can come back to you and you're just standing there waiting because you just want to wait for me to finish freaking out, and then you'll attack me like little nice hero.
So you don't like JRPGs is what you're saying? That's a very Japanese mentality of like...
Yeah, I mean, in a traditional sense, I don't really like JRPGs, no.
or like it's sort of like an anime thing, where people like pose
I mean, like,
and posture and show off, and it's really style.
And I mean, that was one of the big reasons why I talked about Metal Gear Solid. Like, I've played through Metal Gear Solid games, and I have enjoyed them. And like I can sit through the exposition and I can enjoy the story that they're trying to give me, but I just feel like it's weakened by the fact that it's two people who are mortal enemies standing around chatting with each other. Like, I can't stand it going fully to anime instead of just Japanese games. I can't stand it in anime when, I mean, obviously Dragon Ball Z is a fantastic example, Naruto is a fantastic example, every anime is a fantastic example, when there's supposed to be a giant fight and people just chat about their lives and why they're like this, and like, oh yeah, I'm gonna tell my enemy all my deepest, darkest secrets about how I was really picked on as a kid, and that's why I'm so bad now.
Yeah, well, and also the new character that just was introduced is also another character in disguise, and all those really typical anime tropes. Yeah, so you say that a lot of the plot in a lot of these animes, it's presented in just like weird discussions with the characters. It's not active plot.
To go back to what we were talking about earlier with things like BioShock or Bastion, that aspect of learning about a character not by fighting them and having them monologue, but by finding their journals, finding their notes.
It can be awesome. Like, you gotta admit, a man chooses, a slave obeys. In BioShock, that midpoint was striking and amazing, and just, it was a cutscene. It took control away from you, and he used that as a plot element. It was
okay, but that was fantastic.
Yeah.
That was okay, but that is using taking control away from the player literally. That is like, if it's a subject of literal mind control or something like that, sure, take control away from the player. Like, that is amazing.
Yeah, okay, but what about something like in Mass Effect 2, you know, Shepard dies at the beginning, and
spoilers.
And so then there's this awesome cutscene about you getting revived.
Okay, but that's also different, because I mean, your character's obviously not active at that point. I mean, they could just wake you up, but that essentially was just like an opening. Like all that was a credit sequence for me.
But there were no credits, really.
Yeah, I mean, it was just like pretty shiny thing.
You know, I gotta admit, I don't think that the story to Mass Effect 2 is very good.
No,
and I never played Mass Effect 3, but...
yeah, you equally won't be that impressed with Mass Effect 3 once you play through it.
Yeah, Mass Effect 1 had some really cool, like, plot elements to it.
It had a fantastic idea behind it. It was amazing.
It really did. And I gotta say, I liked that plot a lot more than Mass Effect 2 for all its cinematicness. I mean, it certainly was more fun to watch. Probably more fun to play.
It was more fun to watch. I enjoyed the combat more because I like shooters.
I really appreciate beautiful things, you know, beautiful visuals, and there were a lot of beautiful visuals.
And it looked good, and it had a lot of it had a lot of cool things. But
are those two things do you think that it becoming more cinematic is what distracted from the story? Are those two things related?
Absolutely. I mean, if you're pouring that much money and resources into making something visually impressive, like when you're fighting the human Reaper at the end, like
is that supposed to be like some big reveal that you're scared about? You're like, oh no, now they're making unkillable death AIs that look like us. Like, why is that scarier than they're just being unkillable death AIs waiting to destroy the galaxy?
Yeah, exactly. And I felt like that was purely for the fact of being hugely cinematic.
Video game bosses are always a struggle for video games. It's very...
Oh god, especially BioShock. I hate the final boss of BioShock.
Everyone does. Yeah, we don't need to commiserate about that. We know that was bad. Halo 1 had no bosses in it, and it felt great. A lot of people really got drawn into the universe, really got drawn into the story with Halo 1, even though there were basically very few cutscenes or very few, I mean, there were no bosses.
The Witcher 2 arguably doesn't have a final boss fight.
But also, I mean, yeah, it doesn't necessarily have a final boss fight. I mean, that's one of the ways that The Witcher 2 is amazing, is that you can make so many choices that you can choose whether or not there's a boss fight at the end.
That's a game that I feel does cinematic game right.
It really does. I mean, that game is great. People who haven't played that game potentially haven't experienced the potential of choice. Yeah, in a video game.
Oh yeah, they definitely haven't experienced the potential of choice. Like that's an insane level of choice that I don't know has ever been done before, and I don't know if that will ever be done after.
Well, I'm sure that, like, I mean, there's been choice in
obviously
games before.
Obviously that's a huge overblown statement.
Yeah, I mean, you haven't played a lot of RPGs that are choice-based, especially like all of BioWare's RPGs. You haven't played like KOTOR, KOTOR 2, Jade Empire, Baldur's Gate. You haven't played any of those, really.
That's true.
So, I mean, but from my perspective, I've played a lot of those, and I mean, what it seemed like to me with The Witcher 2 is that they weren't afraid to throw away stuff for you. Like in KOTOR and those games, and I loved KOTOR, and it was one of my favorite games. And they were not willing to throw away anything, no matter what you did. You visited all the same places. You did basically all the same things. I mean, the only thing that changed maybe is like one or two small sections of the game. And Witcher 2 is unique in that they'll throw away a third of the content in the game if you make different choices. Like they'll give you a different third of content. They're like, okay, well, instead of making the game 40 hours, we'll make it 20 hours. And two playthroughs can be very different from each other.
It's one of the things that I really appreciate, because even though Witcher 2 is a very, very cinematic game, it does it in a way that feels really appropriate. Like you never feel like Geralt is necessarily acting out of character. Like you don't feel like he's doing something you wouldn't want him to be doing.
Okay, well, Hawf, let's wrap it up. What don't you want? What do you hate?
What don't I want?
You don't want cutscenes.
Well, I'm not a big fan of cutscenes. I feel that the only thing they do is they drag you out of the immersion of the situation. A game that I feel like tells story incredibly well without cutscenes, without anything like that, is Amnesia. Like
okay.
I've hardly gotten into Amnesia at all, but the way it tells story is amazing.
It does take you out. It just reads journals out loud to you, while you don't
Yeah,
have any
but
control.
That's fine. Like that's the same as audio journals to me in a similar fashion. Like
takes away control from your character. You can't walk
Yeah, but
around
it's-
while the audio journal's going on.
yeah, but it does it in a way that's like, okay, you sit down to read a journal. Like that's fine to me.
Hawf, I don't know if I understand what you don't want, what you don't like, but we covered a lot of interesting things today, and so I'm glad I could have you.
Well,
join the show.
I want people to join us in the comments below and chime in with what they think.
Everybody send us emails. We don't get a lot of viewer mail.
Yeah, send us emails about whatever you want.
Yeah, qualitydiscourse@gmail.com. All right.
Boom.
Bye everyone.
Bye.